Hi there and welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, my name's Sam. I'm a romance author based in the UK, and today we are going to be talking about all of the structural edits that I was given for this book. This book is called The Summer Wedding in Santorini, and at the time of putting out this video, it comes out in 2 weeks, so the 2nd of March 2023, and I am super excited. I've been creating a lot of content over on my Instagram about the book to try to promote it, but this is the first time I'm really focusing on it in one of my videos here, and I thought it would be really fun to talk about some of the things that have changed about this book during the editing process. But first, let me tell you a little bit about the book so that you can understand some of the edits. First of all, it's a sequel, and it is a sequel to this book, The Summer House in Santorini. So these two books are a duology. The story does end with the summer wedding in Santorini. There won't be any more in this series. And I am going to share a few things about the edits that might sound like they're spoilers for The Summer House in Santorini, but actually I assure you they are not. Now, I am published by One More Chapter, which is an imprint of HarperCollins in the UK, and it's primarily a digital first list, which means a couple of things. First of all, that ebooks and paperbacks will tend to come out at the same time, and there won't be a hardback release. And the second is that it's very much focused on digital retailers rather than stocking in traditional bookstores. So as much as we all hate Amazon, they are the best place to find my books. The Summer House in Santorini came out in 2019, so it will have been about 3.5 years in between the two books coming out, and there's a not dissimilar time jump between them. The books follow Anna and Nikos. Yes, it is the same characters between the two, and again, not necessarily a spoiler. Anna is from the northeastern United States, but her father, from whom she was estranged when she was a child, is from Santorini. And when he dies, he leaves her a house on the island, and she goes to claim it and try to fix it up and sell it on, and ends up meeting Nikos while she's there. That's in the first book. The second book does take place back on the island. Maybe one day I'll do a video about everything I did change about this book, because this book went through the most drastic changes, which is a humbling experience, but helpfully, The Summer Wedding in Santorini was a different story. It much more closely resembles the initial draft that I sent to my editor, and so let's talk about what some of those changes were. To be clear, I'm talking about the structural edit, and if you're not familiar with the editing process, there's usually 3 different types of edits. There's structural edits, which are looking at sort of big picture things. Then you have what's called line edits, which is where you start to look at the line level. So looking at this paragraph is structured weird, or this isn't the right word to describe this, or is this really how she would articulate this? Those are kind of line edits rather than structural edits. And then you have proofreads, which is you use the wrong verb tense here, you're missing a comma, that kind of thing. And they tend to happen in that order. And the reason for that is because you don't want to do line edits and proofreads on something that's going to fundamentally change, because that's a waste of time. So you get the story right structurally, then you get the lines right, and then you start to look at the fine detail. So that's the editorial process. We're looking at structural edits. It is also worth noting that, at least in this case, my editor didn't make me change anything. Some editors can be a bit firmer, and it probably depends on the nature of the edits. Certainly for Summer House, some of those changes definitely needed to happen, and my then editor would have been right to insist on them if I had pushed back. But especially for this book in particular, none of it is required. It's all suggestions. And some authors get a little bit proprietary about those things, and they don't necessarily listen to edits. And yes, I can imagine that there are instances where editors suggest something that isn't the best thing for the book. However, that collaboration is really important. To me, I always think if they have flagged something to me, it's because what's there isn't working in that way. And so even if I'm not going to fix it the exact way they've suggested, I know I need to fix it because I want the reader to have a good experience. I've always found a way to address it in some way, shape, or form within the text. So that's enough blabbering for me. I am going to tell you now what the structural edits were for The Summer Wedding in Santorini, and there were only 6 of them, which I was very pleased about. The first edit was the balance of external versus internal conflict. When I first wrote the draft for this book, I shared it with a beta reader who basically fed back that the conflict was way too internal. There wasn't enough external stuff happening. And what I did was I overcompensated, and I made it so that there were too many external things happening, and not even necessarily that there were too many, but more just that those were the things that were having the biggest impact on the story rather than the internal conflict, when really their decisions and their actions and their next steps needed to be defined by that internal conflict instead. So I had some work to do there to make sure that the thing that was motivating them through the story was the character arc that they were going on and the internal conflict that was shaping that character arc, rather than these external things that were getting thrown at them. Those external conflicts are still there, but I've made them more resonant to the internal conflict and made them more of a fuel for that and creating new perspectives for that, rather than making them be just more things that are happening. The second edit is adding in more of Nikos' point of view. If you've read The Summer House in Santorini, you know that there is one chapter in Nikos' point of view towards the end. And when I submitted this draft to Jenny, I had one chapter in Nikos' point of view towards the end, and it was very much a mirror to that first book. She didn't immediately go, oh, that's just like the first book. What she did instead was say, oh my God, it was so good to see Nikos' point of view around some of this conflict. I wish I had more of that in the story. So what I ended up doing was adding in a lot more of Nikos' point of view chapters, so you get a lot more Nikos in The Summer Wedding in Santorini. The next thing was about the emotional crescendo through the book and how the emotion builds throughout the narrative. When I turned in the draft at first, it did build, but it did it more in like spurts that got more and more intense each time, rather than there being like a consistent build. And yes, you want to have sort of mini climaxes along the way. That's how you create good pacing. But it meant that the emotional tone of the book felt a bit too up and down. And so what I needed to do was go through and smooth that out a little bit and just make sure, even if I was creating those waves, that they felt more like waves and less like spikes. The next edit, and if you've read the first book, this name will mean something to you, is Marcus. And yes, Marcus is back. So Marcus is Anna's ex-boyfriend slash ex-boss, which you know at the very beginning of Summer House, he is in that. But he's in Summer House as more of like a villain type character. In Summer Wedding, he is back as, still maybe counts as an antagonist, but actually kind of more of an ally as well, not a classic antagonist in the way he is in the first book. And Jenny's note to me about that was to make sure that it was believable after everything that happened in the first book why Anna would allow him back into her life at all, much less in the capacity that he is back in her life. And so I had to do a little bit of work on the sort of time gap between these books and how I communicate what that relationship looked like. So I had to make sure that their new backstory was clear from their interactions really early on in the story, so that the reader gets a sense for, okay, we're okay with this guy right now. The fifth edit was to the timelines at the end and sort of the mechanics of the epiphany that she has. When you're looking at the emotional climax of a book, you want to make sure that the reader is right there with you, and any confusion that takes the reader out of that moment is unwelcome and counterproductive to what you're trying to do, which is to draw them in. And there were a few things about just like navigating from place to place and making certain decisions and certain leaps of logic that just weren't super clear. And so I needed to do a bit of work to sort of create some breathing room within that and make it really clear what her thought process was, what the physical mechanics of that climax are, and just make sure that it was a really smooth and immersive read for the reader. And I sent that section back to beta readers multiple times to try to get their input, and I hope I've done a better job now. Jenny seems to think I have. The sixth and final batch of structural edits that I got are the closest that we got to traditional line edits. And that was in a particular section where Anna goes on a hen do, or bachelorette party, for the titular wedding. And while they're there, they go to see an oracle. So think like creepy fortune teller kind of vibes. It is meant to be a very emotionally heightened and relationally charged kind of time, and it also is meant to simultaneously help Anna come to a couple of conclusions, but also maybe confuse her a little bit more in other ways. It's a really important part of the story. And there were some things that were just kind of, again, taking the reader out of that really important moment. So I had to really strip that back and say, what am I trying to achieve here in terms of the story and in terms of the emotionality and in terms of the internal character arc, and how is this contributing to that? Everything else is unimportant. And yes, some of that detail got added back in because it was interesting or it helped the reader understand why Anna was feeling and thinking the way that she was, but it was definitely less disruptive than it was originally. And now I think that scene does a much better job of feeling not just important, but immersive, just like that final sort of epiphany and climax as well. So that's it. Those are the 6 structural edits that I received for The Summer Wedding in Santorini. I made all of those, then there were some line edits, but again, the edits were quite light on this one. I'm really proud of this one and how the editing process went. I've had some early reviews in that are saying that the sequel is even better than the first book, and the first book is fairly well reviewed on Amazon, so I feel really good about the experience people are gonna have reading it. I really hope people love it, and I'm super excited to share it with everyone. When I put out my first book, I was definitely more nervous than excited, and now I'm definitely more excited than nervous. There's obviously still a bit of nerves there, but how could there not be? The Summer Wedding in Santorini comes out on the 2nd of March, 2023. So if you're finding this video before then, you can pre-order it on Amazon. Or if you're finding it after the fact, then obviously it's available now, so you can find it wherever. But obviously if you haven't read the first book yet, The Summer House in Santorini, I would definitely encourage you to pick that up first. Both are available in ebook and paperback, and I'll be sure to leave the links in the description. Normally I talk about all kinds of books, not just my own books, as well as my writing process and what it's like to work with a publisher and have worked at a publisher. So if you'd like to join for some of that, be sure to hit subscribe. I'm starting a new project at the moment that I'm really excited to share with you, sort of how I'm going about getting that off the ground. So follow along if you don't want to miss that. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.